York's very own muscle building coaches, Anthony Bevilacqua and Pete Kacharian, proudly present to you New York Muscle Radio.
What's up, guys? New York Muscle Radio, episode number 178. It's your host, Anthony Bevilacqua, alongside my co-host, Big Pete Kacharian. Today, we have our special guest with us, the New York Muscle Radio Dr. Austin Marshall. And today, we're going to go over everything about the thyroid. So basically, the thyroid function for muscle gain and fat loss. But before we get rolling with this podcast, I want to remind everyone listening, you can head on over to newyorkmuscleradio.com/getjacked, Jakked, for your free 12-week training program. It's our way of saying thank you for being loyal listeners. And if you just happen to find this podcast because you were interested in the title, or maybe you're interested in hearing about from our New York Muscle Radio doctor, you get a free training program. So newyorkmuscleradio.com/getjacked. Without further ado, let's get rolling here. Big Pete, how you doing, pal?
I'm doing good. I'm just sipping on my post-workout shake right now, so I'm trying to stay anabolic throughout this podcast here.
Yeah, and we have on the line our New York Muscle Radio doctor, Austin Marshall. What's up, buddy? How are you, man? It's been a couple episodes since you've been here last.
That's true. Yeah, it was a few episodes ago, but I'm doing good. What about you guys?
Hey, good. How's the weather in Texas?
Oh, it's like sunny and starting to get hot, and I'm starting to complain when I'm working out in the home gym in the garage. So this is our like winter for you guys in New York. So yeah, it's coming in.
Nice. So you have a whole gym set up in the home garage? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I haven't sent y'all a picture.
No, you're holding out, man.
Oh, well, it's, I got like a rogue rack and some dumbbells and, everything that you need for just, it's no AB fitness studio, but, it's got most of the stuff. It's probably a step up from Pete's dungeon basement with the concrete.
Yeah, I usually train at the AB Fitness Center, so I am spoiled. But tonight I actually went to the commercial gym, and I remembered how much I hate that.
It's terrible.
They have 3 squat racks, and I was there for about an hour and a half, and I didn't get on one of them.
Oh, that's
so,
the worst.
Yeah, that's how that is there.
Little monkey curling on the inside of them.
Actually, yeah, someone was doing 65-pound overhead presses, and it was just, it's frustrating. I think that's worse than curling in a squat rack, because when I curl, I do at least 135.
You would say that.
You were doing legs today, so you should have worked in with the person doing overhead press for 165.
That would have been a smart idea.
Yeah. All right, so let's get going with the thyroid. So this is an interesting podcast again. So many people complain to me, being a personal trainer for years, I've heard, people use the excuse of, I have an underactive thyroid. My doctor put me on this. I can't lose weight. So let's begin by defining the thyroid and what exactly does it do?
Yeah, so, as much as people are coming to you talking about their thyroid, they're coming to me and talking about their thyroid even more.
Oh, really? I didn't know. Do people just come in and say, oh, something's wrong with my thyroid, just like that?
With the advent of WebMD and Dr. Google, yes. People come in all the time with their, self-diagnosed type of medical issues. Thyroid is one of the more common ones. And it's because it has such a wide range of things that it does in our body that it gets blamed, and it's the scapegoat for so many different things that aren't necessarily really related back to the thyroid, but you can kind of relate it to some of the symptoms of, some of the thyroid stuff that we'll talk about later on. So, but, if you're talking about, just like in general, what the thyroid is, so it's all part of the endocrine system, which is essentially just like our hormone system in our body. It's a gland, and the thyroid gland itself sits right below your Adam's apple. It's about the size of almost like a butterfly, and it's actually butterfly shaped. It has 2 different lobes on it, and it's essentially just like a gland that has, some follicles on the inside that it secretes the hormones that are responsible, the thyroid hormones. And there's, 2 main ones. You got T3 and T4, and those are the things that are actually responsible for the thyroid function. So, the whole point of the thyroid is it's essentially our body's thermostat. So it's the central control to our metabolism. So you want it just right in the middle. You don't want it overactive and you don't want it underactive. And in general, for the most part, most of our thyroids do a pretty stinking good job of just cruising at altitude right in the middle without it going underactive or overactive. And the reason that it gets so much press is because people like to look at it and look at all the numbers in a certain way to say, oh, okay, well, yeah, my thyroid is underactive. But, as we'll talk about, there's so much more to it than, just some of the numbers and some of the symptoms that you can often get kind of tracked down in, the Google pathway. So, that's its main function it's there for a purpose and it's there for a reason. And it just helps our body to maintain our metabolism. So, those mainly it does it through those two main hormones, the T3 and the T4.
So I'm just out of curiosity. So when people come to you and say they have a thyroid issue, is it most of the time the underlying reason because they can't lose weight? Is that why they're coming to? I'm just curious. I didn't know that. What you said before.
Well, it's mainly that. Yeah. So it's kind of a joke, in medicine that every and never at all stereotyping, but every single 40-something-year-old who's overweight is convinced that they have a thyroid problem until proven otherwise. And we say that jokingly, but it's kind of like a function of just you've had a few kids and you're not as active as you used to be, and your diet is probably crappy more days than not. You're not subscribed to New York Muscle Radio, so it can fall off quick, and and so that no one wants to take responsibility for it and say, yeah, no, I've messed up. I've let myself go a little bit. So therefore, it's something that is so easy to blame because it has so many different ways that it's working in the body, like our energy levels, and, it has impact on just about every single system in the body.
Yeah, it's so true. I mean, I talk to my, general population clients, and it's like, you talk to them about diet and nutrition, and they're like, yeah, well, I was bad Friday, I was bad Saturday, I was bad Sunday. Well, that's 3 days. There's 7 days a week. Exactly, that's half the week that's gone. And, no wonder why you can't lose weight,
Exactly. Yeah. And they easily blow it off in their heads without taking responsibility. And that's, I think the biggest thing is if people would track, just flexible dieting, not even stepping into the gym, it would, change a whole lot of that. But I mean, that's you guys know that so much more than I do, I'm sure.
All right, so let's define exactly T3 and T4, the two hormones that you mentioned, in terms of fitness. So why should we be concerned with these hormones? And let's relate all this back now to fitness.
So T3 and T4, those are the two main thyroid hormones that we have in our body, and T4 is by far the most common one. It is at least in a ratio of like 15 to 1. So for every 15 T4 molecules, we have 1 T3 molecule. So T4 is what's known as thyroxine, and this is kind of like the placeholder thyroid hormone. So our thyroid gland produces a whole lot of it. It secretes it. And it has a base of tyrosine, which is like an amino acid, as well as 4 iodine molecules. So in order for that molecule to essentially turn on and have its effect on the body as far as metabolism, there's some enzymes that turn it from 4 iodine molecules into 3 iodine molecules, and that's how we get T3, which is just 3 iodine molecules, and that is the biologically active form of it. So we have all of this T4 in our body, and then whenever your body is ready to actually utilize it and kind of essentially, turn on our metabolism, it cuts off one of those iodine molecules, and bam, we got T3, and then that's the active thyroid hormone that produces, all of the effects that we talk about as far as metabolism. So, metabolism in medicine is synonymous to whenever people talk about core in the fitness industry. It's so non-defined, and it's just you got to bite your lip when someone says it. So, metabolism is all over the place. But, in general, we talk about metabolism as in, what your basic metabolic rate is. And, there's formulas and everything to calculate it. But, essentially how fast that your cells are moving and doing the job, how quick that your heart rate is moving, how fast your cells are firing and kind of doing its function throughout the body. So, the T3 is the main ingredient that actually, turns these processes up. It, kind of puts on the gas. So, in terms of fitness, ideally, if you wanted to lose a whole lot of weight, it would be better to have more T3 on board, because you're activating a lot of these proteins and a lot of these cells that have an end result of, quote, speeding your metabolism up, which, will essentially make you burn more calories, food, fat for fuel, and therefore you would get leaner. And it is, a trademark of some of the hardcore, pro bodybuilder ranks where they're ingesting it from a pill, T3, to synthetically do that.
That can't be good.
Yeah, I think it's a little irresponsible at times, especially some of the dosages that I hear about some of these guys pushing. But our body is so much smarter than us, and sometimes whenever we try and outsmart it, I cringe sometimes. But I mean, to each their own. That's what they're doing.
Well, I have actually a question with that. So, so if T3 is really the one that controls fat loss, and you're ingesting another form of T3, don't you risk the ability to lose muscle, because just turning on your metabolism, so your body's just going to be burning calories? Wouldn't you be at a double dose for burning muscle?
Yeah,
because your body's just burning anything. It's not necessarily fat, right?
That's a very good question that you bring up. Obviously, if it's so heavily utilized, I don't think it must have more specificity for fatty acids and just kind of like general glucose disposal as opposed to muscle cells. There must be something about it where it's not degrading muscle cells, because I mean it's like a staple portion of an IFBB Pro's cutting regimen is you're on the T3 and clen into the show, and they're usually not losing too much muscle. So I don't know the exact medical reason why.
That they're on.
Yeah, that's true. That's that's really true. That's probably why. So
I've also heard of people using T4 as a supplement as well.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying to put out a house fire with a garden hose. It's just it's not super strong compared to T3. Like if you essentially just use the biologically active form, in that case that one is definitely the much more potent one, and why it's probably a little less safe than someone just on levothyroxine or T4.
So you mentioned T4, and then you said that it loses an ion molecule and becomes T3. So when that happens, just to give everyone an idea of kind of what happens in the metabolism. So what does T3 then go ahead and communicate with, I guess, in order to tell your body, okay, let's burn fat now. Now it's time to burn fat. So let's kind of make that loop very simple for people to understand.
Okay,
I know it's very complicated, but I just want to get everyone the idea.
Exactly. No, so it's iodine. So not
iodine. I'm sorry.
So whenever that iodine molecule is cut off, it has an effect to essentially go to all of your cells, and it essentially is almost like a key. It opens up the cells and it turns on the mitochondria, which is like the energy producers of the cell, and it's like the main thing. It's like the gasoline to ignite that and turn it on. That's its main function in a as little scientific stuff as we really want to go into.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So now I want to just back up a little bit. So diet-wise, so now if I'm eating in a caloric deficit, there's more T3 in my system. Is that kind of how it works, or no, it doesn't work like that at all? It's just that T3 and T4 balance is kind of always happening, and when you're in more of a deficit, you're just burning more.
I'm struggling to try and answer this accurately. I don't want to give you a BS answer, but I think it's more of the latter. Like I said, our bodies are a whole lot smarter than us. So the thyroid in most people is not really something that we have to like think about. It's just working. It's doing its job. It's keeping everything in homeostasis, which is just nice and level, not too high, not too low. So just as much as you don't want too much of these T3, T4, you also don't want too little of them. So it's a feedback loop that is maintained in a normal range as far as I know, unless you're not consuming enough salt, which is where most of our iodine comes from. As long as the salt portion of it is in there, I'm not 100% sure exactly how caloric surplus versus a deficit would have in that, as long as you're getting those salt requirements. I would think it would be about the same. I mean, just mechanistically.
Yeah, because one of the things that a lot of people talk about in this industry, and I don't know if I'm not sure exactly how it works, but they say, whenever you're dieting for an extended period of time and then you end up having a refeed day, kind of, it helps spike up those fat-burning hormones. So obviously leptin is one of them, but then they talk about T3 being one of those hormones that gets elevated when we're in a deficit and then we eat again. So I'm just curious if you know anything about that end, if we could kind of talk about that. I mean, it's a tough question. So I don't know if it's right or wrong. I just want to know if it's if the industry's right or the industry's wrong. I know leptin's responsible for a lot of that.
Yeah. Damn, I still I hate to be a dumbass, but I just don't.
Man. I'm asking tough questions.
You are.
We're trying to figure out. Pills. Yeah, we're trying to figure out, is it bro science or is it real science here?
Honestly,
it's funny. Hold on, wait, Austin. I got to tell everybody. So I usually give if a listener comes on, I give them the questions a little bit beforehand so they can kind of prepare. This is off the cuff. So Austin is not prepared. The poor guy wanted to be prepared, so he didn't sound. He knew, and I caught him off guard.
Hey, for the record, every single podcast that we've done, I said, all right, man. Hey, send me the show notes. Let me make sure I know what I'm talking about. I get them like an hour before. I'm like, oh shit. But so I can tell you this. It would be something that would be extremely hard to actually quantify, because we can't even so whenever we send someone for lab work, T3, that we don't even have a great way of measuring T3, especially total T3. All of the assays, like all of the stuff in the lab, there's like so much debate in the medical side of it, whether it's actually accurate or not. Because it's such an expensive and complicated kind of test to run to know what it is actually. So I think it's got to be a lot of bro science or someone trying to sell their DVDs or whatever to say that, yes, oh yeah, the T3 is boosting up whenever you're having a caloric surplus. It may have something to do with it, but I wouldn't yo-yo diet just to try and to hack the system to get the T3 to try and catch it on the upstream. And I think there's probably a whole lot more that goes into it. So I'm going to say bro science, but I would be glad to read more on it and prove myself wrong.
Yeah, I would think that it would be mostly the leptin that would cause most of those spikes.
Yeah, exactly.
But actually, I have a hypothesis. I don't know how true this would be, but maybe they're right in the sense that when you do have a high carb day, there's generally more salt consumed on that day. So
there you go. Yeah,
maybe that might be a good.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's so many things that go into it. It's so hard. You never, hardly ever can just point your finger to one thing and say, yeah, that's it.
So now there's two types of, you mentioned it before. There's, when you're underactive thyroid and overactive thyroid. So let's talk about that. So one of them is hypothyroidism. So let's discuss that, and let's start with that one first.
Okay, so the most common one that everyone always talks about is the underactive one, the hypothyroidism. So in general, it's essentially it's related to where the thyroid gland itself is underactive. Now, there's kind of like two main reasons that this happens. So everywhere outside of like Western worlds, the most common cause is actually iodine deficiency. So, if you look at some of the populations like Africa, some European countries, Asian countries, a lot of times it's actually from not consuming enough iodine in the diet. So if you look at most of our salt, it is the most common form of it. So obviously in the United States, we overconsume the hell out of salt, and most of it is iodinated, which they throw in the iodine because you can't taste it. And so we really don't have too much of an issue with that in Western countries. But some less developed countries can definitely have iodine deficiency as a cause of it. So assuming that you're a Westerner and you eat enough salt, the next most common cause is an autoimmune disease that's called Hashimoto's disease. And this is literally where your body produces antibodies to the cells on the inside of your thyroid, and it can happen at any point in one's life. Usually it's kind of young adulthood, where your body literally attacks your thyroid and destroys its ability to release those thyroid hormones, the T3 and the T4. So naturally, what happens as a result is that your T3, T4 levels will go down, and then you start to have all of the symptoms of an underactive thyroid. So when we're talking about underactive thyroid, it's same thing as like a slowing of everything. So you're talking they're extremely tired. They can have a lot of weight gain. They can have changes in their skin and in their nails. They can be constipated, menstrual irregularities. It's just everything slowing down because you don't have enough of those thyroid hormones to turn on all of the cells in your body to kind of help to with your metabolism.
Yeah. So now, really quick, I want to circle back a little bit. You mentioned, with the underactive thyroid, salt intake, the iodized salt. I just think it's funny that a lot of people in the fitness industry too, these are people who want to lose weight and whatnot, but the stigma that says like, do not consume salt. Like, if you want to lose weight, don't consume salt. But it seems kind of the opposite. Every time I kind of, especially when dieting, I seem to, the more I increase my salt intake, the leaner and bigger I look.
Yeah,
and it just has like a different effect in your body. So it's like you do need salt. So this dogma around that people, don't have salt, don't add salt to your food. That's total BS. I mean, I thought, Pete, I'm going back to the meme. What year is it? Because people do actually still talk about that, and it's mostly the general population.
Well, and you know why? It's because in the medical side of it definitely still is a thing with older patient populations who aren't working out, who aren't taking care of themselves, who are eating a shitty diet. It's definitely eating too much salt in that context. It can raise the blood pressure, and that's the main reason, is that it can draw the fluid on to the inside of inside of the vessels and cause a little bit more hypertension. So that's, I think, the main reason why it's bastardized. But I'm totally, probably most people listening to this, salt is definitely not the demon that it's made out to be. If anything, some of us are probably lacking, and especially if you're working out real hard and you're not repleting those electrolytes, you can definitely become a little bit deficient in sodium, which in and of itself is not, like you said, it's a bad thing. You definitely need sodium. So yeah, you're right. It's totally demonized in the general population, which really shouldn't be.
Yeah. So now let's circle back to the Hashimoto. So you mentioned that was a disease that happens, and I find it to be, I've had actually 2 clients in my lifetime who've actually had Hashimoto's. Can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think it's a little more common than people actually think.
Oh yeah, exactly. So it's essentially like an autoimmune destruction, and almost like what's called a thyroiditis, which is like where the thyroid gland at one point in someone's life is it's almost like infected and irritated, and after that is when it can kind of just essentially those antibodies can form, and it can start to degrade some of the cells on the inside of the thyroid. So the problem is that this can happen for any kind of host of different reasons. Some people, it's much more of a genetic component. Some people can have, different like chemical exposures sometimes in their life that can be related to it. It's kind of associated with some, other autoimmune diseases, kind of like type 1 diabetes. So it kind of, we're not 100% sure from a medical standpoint why people develop these antibodies that that essentially just attack your own body. But we do know that it happens, and it's like you said, it's not extremely uncommon. And technically, it's the most common cause of an underactive thyroid in the United States.
What's a typical treatment for something like that? So if someone just got diagnosed and they're listening to this, or this may be something they hear it, whatever, what would the typical treatment be for something like that? Is it curable?
Oh, it's honestly, it is probably one of the easiest things to treat in medicine, I think. All you have to do is, since your thyroid gland isn't producing enough of that hormone, T4, T3, the standard to what we do is just replace that T4 so that your body has enough to be able to convert it later on into T3. So that's in the form of levothyroxine or Synthroid, which is just a pharmaceutical derivative of T4. And we just dose it as a daily pill, and it essentially just normalizes those levels right back out to normal. So like sometimes people can have their thyroid removed for any kind of reason, like surgery or cancer or anything like that. And these people afterwards, we it might take a few different lab readings to get their thyroid back into normal levels, but I mean, they can live a completely normal life after that. Just kind of takes a little tweaking, you get it to the right level, and that pretty much function exactly the same as before. So it's definitely not a life sentence by any means. It's very easily treated. We just got to get the levels into the right groove.
Because I actually texted one of my clients who had Hashimoto's, and I let her know that I was on the line with the New York Muscle Radio doctor. So I asked if she had any questions because she does have Hashimoto's. So she asks, what is the difference between Synthroid and levothyroxine? She used to be on Levox, whatever the one is, and she said, but they stopped making it, so she's on the generic. And she heard that there's inconsistencies in the generic production, and was wondering if there's any difference. And is Synthroid better than levothyroxine? And she asked the doctor to change it.
Okay, so she's talking about levothyroxine. So
yes,
levothyroxine is essentially just the generic version of Synthroid. Synthroid is like the trade name. So in most things in medicine, we say, oh no, the generic is just the same. It's just a chemical structure of the exact same thyroid hormone. Nothing to worry about. But in the case of Synthroid versus levothyroxine, I have heard so many different endocrinologists, which is like a subspecialist of that just works with this all day long, that always just absolutely preach by going with the brand name Synthroid. So we say that for most medicines, the generic is just fine, but whatever keeps your levels in a normal range, I think is best. If it were my underactive thyroid, I would probably shoot for Synthroid. I mean, just because it is, whenever you look at these and how they're dosed, they have such kind of like weird dosing schedules. It's like, some pills are like 10 milligrams, 20 milligrams, 30 milligrams, and all of the thyroid ones are just completely random, and they're in micrograms, which is like a whole lot smaller. So it's little tiny micro doses, and so it's like 88 micrograms, 112 micrograms. So it's got all of these like super random kind of like dosing ranges that we go by. So I think because it's such a tiny dose of the thyroid hormones themselves, having something that is quote the best, like a trade name Synthroid, for a lot of patients is probably actually worth it. And I hardly ever say that about anything else. Generic versus trade name.
Yeah, well, I guess it comes up because that was a good question, I think. So, and she has one more question too, which also relates to the podcast. Does Hashimoto's affect weight loss even if my blood work is good? I've been on 112 mcgs for 2 years, and she started at 50.
So it just goes back to exactly what her numbers are. So whenever we're getting labs, we're looking at a few different variables. As long as her doctor is taking all of these into consideration and has got everything into the normal ranges of everything, her thyroid is functioning just as well as it would have been functioning. Well, I shouldn't say it like that. Her thyroid levels are the exact same as what they would have been before she had any kind of issue with the Hashimoto's in the first place. So at that point, you have to cross that off the list as far as like medical reasons why you would have trouble losing weight. So,
That's
like once you get those levels to the right place, you are essentially a quote normal person. So you have to move on from that.
And is that just across the board with anything with hypothyroid? So if you're on just any medication, as long as it's in the normal range, you're fine. Doesn't matter.
Yes, I'm trying to think of a reason why that wouldn't be the case. But I hate to say always or never, but in general, usually yes. I mean, I first got into bodybuilding through it was one doctor named Dr. Spencer Nadolsky, who he's public about his Hashimoto's, and I started reading a lot on it after that. Just he's absolutely ripped, and as long as you have those levels into the right range, for most people, it's doing the job of what the thyroid is not doing in the first place. So in general, yes, it's I would say a very curable, fixable kind of thing.
Do you want to get the results you've always dreamed of? Do you want coaches that genuinely care, are professional, and get back to you in a timely manner? Do you want to be stronger, healthier, and look better naked? Then let me tell you, New York Muscle Radio is definitely your answer. Since working with them, I can hardly believe the results.
They coached me through a post-contest reverse diet and all the way through to an off-season strength program.
These two fitness geniuses have pushed me outside of my comfort zone, and in the process, I have been able to make big jumps on all of my major lifts.
In 14 weeks, I added 100 pounds to my powerlifting total and smashed my first meet.
Since working with them, I've added 55 pounds to my squat, 50 pounds to my deadlift, and 20 pounds to my bench press.
And in 12 weeks, I dropped over 10 pounds of body fat and added over 20 pounds to all my lifts.
I have never had as amazing of glutes as I have training with them. So I can say, no matter what your goals are, you're guaranteed to be stronger, healthier, and let's face it, better looking if Pete and Anthony are your coaches.
So if you are tuning in to listen and learn from the huge array of knowledge these two have, or if you want to hire them as your coaches, you will not be disappointed.
New York Muscle Radio is the best in the business.
You heard it from our New York Muscle Radio clients. Do you want to join our team and reach your fitness goals? Visit NewYorkMuscleRadio.com for all our coaching programs.
But I'll tell you what, when I'm done, my biceps are humongous. Humongous. Like that, bang!
My name is Anthony Bevilacqua, and I'm the host of New York Muscle Radio podcast. My arms have been a weak point for years. When I started training, my arms measured 11 inches. Even after many years of hardcore training, nothing would get them to grow. With the help of my co-host, Big Pete, we set out on a mission to gain 1 solid inch to my arms in 12 weeks.
In the greatest experiment of all.
12 weeks later, this program finally helped me get 18-inch arms. The 12-week arm experiment, the ultimate arm growth program, ebook, the audio book, and the workout video. Pick up your copy now on NewYorkMuscleRadio.com.
Hey, great coffee.
Doesn't it taste good as Fresh Perk?
Better.
Better than those girls make at the office?
Honey, their coffee can't hold a candle to yours.
Caffeine, the world's only instant coffee that's fortified with muscle-building protein. Visit buyproteincoffee.com now.
Damn.
Nice, Pete.
What?
I saw you checking out that girl's butt.
What? I was just checking out her yoga pants.
Pete.
I was thinking you'd look really good in yoga pants.
Uh-huh.
I was like trying to check out what brand it was. Like I was looking at her form on deadlifts. They were all messed up.
Do you think she has a nicer butt than me?
Well, it definitely doesn't look like a pancake.
Did you just call my butt a pancake?
Well, I mean...
What can I do?
You gotta try New York Muscle Radio's Glutylicious program.
Glutylicious?
Yeah, you'll finally get a celebrity booty, like all the other girls following the program.
Fine, I'll do it. But don't get jealous when other guys check out my glutylicious ass.
Glutylicious, your guide to getting a celebrity booty in 12 weeks. Now available exclusively at NYMRmuscleradio.com.
What's up, New York Muscle Radio listeners? It's your co-host, Big Pete Kacharian, and I'm glad you're all listening. Put down that tilapia and asparagus. Learn how to get bigger, stronger, and leaner eating what you want. Pick up a copy of Cracking the Flexible Dieting Code exclusively at NewYorkMuscleRadio.com. But for now, let's get to the show.
All right, so let's shift gears now, because now you have people on the opposite end of the spectrum with hyperthyroidism. So that's when they have an overactive thyroid. So let's talk about that.
Before we get all excited about hyperthyroidism, I got one last thing that I wanted to kind of interject on hypothyroidism. So
sure, Austin Marshall podcast, guys.
With the majority of people that come in, so you have all of these symptoms of an underactive thyroid, which like we said is constipated, you're fatigued, you're always tired, your libido's down, you might have changes in your skin, hair, nails. These are such kind of nondescript symptoms that this is partly why everyone thinks that they have a thyroid issue. But more often than not, like I can tell you, I've probably ordered, I don't know, at least 300 to 400 TSH values over the last year. Out of all of those that have come back as far as a true Hashimoto's in my practice is maybe 10 to 20 max. Like it's common enough that we definitely know about it, but it's not like Hashimoto's is the only type of thyroidism. So you can have this what we call subclinical hypothyroidism, which is essentially where you have all of the symptoms and your labs might kind of support it, but you're technically your T3 and your T4 levels are still within a normal range. That's what's called subclinical hypothyroidism, which is, I think, where most people who are on levothyroxine, if you were actually to ask your doctor, well, what kind of hypothyroidism do I have? If they were being honest with you, that's probably what most people have, because in order to diagnose Hashimoto's, you got to get the whole kind of workup with the labs. Like you need to get all the antibodies and all of the different levels, and we're usually not doing that. We're just usually getting what's called the TSH, the thyroid stimulating hormone, and kind of going based on that. And that is, it's kind of just the tip of the iceberg. It doesn't show every single thing, as far as what their T3 levels are, what their T4 levels are. So it's just only part of the situation. So, a lot of people are, I would say, mistakenly diagnosed as hypothyroidism when it's more of a kind of the subclinical hypothyroidism, where they feel like they got hypothyroidism, but their labs don't necessarily support it. And we still kind of treat it about the same, which is, we use levothyroxine or Synthroid or even what's called Armour Thyroid, which is kind of a similar other version of it. We use all of those to still kind of get that thyroid hormone level into even just like a more optimized level. And a lot of times people do feel a little bit better. And it's really just semantics, but it is something I think important to kind of differentiate, because most people probably fall into this range more than actual Hashimoto's.
That's interesting. I didn't even know that. You would think they're all in the same classification.
Yeah, no, it takes someone who knows what they're doing to I think fully diagnose a true Hashimoto's. They have to know the labs that they're ordering, because if not, you can be led astray pretty quickly with the TSH. Like you can go to the doctor and get a steroid shot and then draw your TSH the next week, and it can show that you're hypothyroidism, but you just got a steroid shot, which is kind of a normal reaction. Or you can be sick, or you can be dehydrated sometimes, and a lot of different things can go into it. So that's why you got to get the whole panel as far as your T4, your T3, your thyroid binding globulin, all that to get a full understanding.
Well, why is it that the medical industry does that? They kind of dance around actually getting the actual blood work they need there. Well, why does that happen? I'm just curious, because that happens a lot. I know since we put out the testosterone course and whatever, a lot of guys have been messaging us and saying, "Oh, the doctor's just checking free testosterone or just checking total." So I don't understand why can't they just check for everything when they check for something? So if someone came to you with, they think they have hypothyroidism, whatever, why would they just check everything instead of just checking one?
Because we're a bunch of schmucks. I don't know. No,
But,
honestly,
wouldn't you want to know? Like, I feel like I'd want to know.
oh, I mean, that's this is why I say it depends on exactly who you see, and why I'm it is in terms of my profession. As a PA, it's it doesn't matter exactly the credentials. It matters that person behind the desk actually cares about you and wants to actually get to the bottom root cause of what's going on with you. So I think honestly, and as I've gone more and more into practice, I've definitely learned that the more stuff that we order, obviously the more cost that it's going to be to the patient and the overall medical system, and sometimes more information isn't necessarily better. I usually think it is, but sometimes the less labs that we draw, the less that we would have to explain if it came back abnormal. So honestly, I think it's just laziness and it's being overworked in the medical system. It's sorry, you got to see 20 other patients that day, and I don't want to know what your estrogen levels are, because what happens if your estrogen levels are high, and you don't want to have to think about it or do something about it. So I think that's probably honestly part of it is that don't check it and you don't have to know about it, and just kind of omitting it, which obviously isn't the best way to practice medicine. But yeah, I mean, you're gonna make me
rant,
demonize our whole
yeah, I know.
whole
It's okay.
industry,
Listen,
but-
Austin, I rant on this podcast all the time, man. You can rant all you want. It's fine. Listen, you're a typical, you're a host. You're officially in the family now, man.
Oh, good. All right,
I'm
then.
glad.
So wait,
I'm glad he's saying
Pete,
all
pipe
this too,
down, man.
just
Pipe
because.
down,
Hey,
pipe down. Stop
listen.
talking.
Hey. Let me talk. It's my turn now.
I actually have a question for him before we go on to the opposite end. Go ahead. Say what
No,
you gotta
all
say,
I
man.
wanted to say, I was just putting a comment in there that I said I'm very happy that he's saying this right now, because he's basically saying what people on the outside might realize, but he's giving an insider's point of view on it.
Yeah. And at the same token, though, you can't walk into your doctor's office thinking, "Oh, he's just an asshole. He doesn't know what he's talking about." Because I mean,
But
obviously,
I think that though it's bad. Like I would love to go to Texas and go to see you every year. Maybe I will do that. I make an annual trip.
Let's do it.
I'm serious, because it's hard to find a good physician.
Yeah,
we
it
talk about
is.
this so many times in this podcast. It's very hard.
Yeah, no, it is, and the medical training philosophy is just that it's we are trained to take care of people when they're just about dying. So you want to go to a doctor whenever something real bad, when the shit hits the fan. You want to be able to go to the doctor where he can heal you. Versus we're not so great at doing all the little nuanced stuff that like talking about hormone levels and optimal kind of health and well-being, unless they have an actual interest in it. That's why it just depends on you just got to shop around to find the right one that drives with your style.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to take a plane down to Texas. That's pretty much the
All
answer
right.
to that question. Really quick before we go on to hyperthyroidism, because I really want to touch on that. So is there any other hormones outside of the usual panel that they usually would run for thyroid function that someone should look out for who has Hashimoto's? Is there something else that they should check for?
So as part of Hashimoto's, there's what's called the TPO antibodies, which is it's thyroid peroxidase antibodies. So there's also other different types of antibodies that your doctor can order and actually quantify, and you're able to see based on based on the clinical symptoms in those labs, you can see whether someone has those antibodies that give you an idea as to, oh, this is Hashimoto's, versus no, they don't have Hashimoto's, they have something else, or the subclinical type hypothyroidism, or even just what's called thyroiditis, which is just like an inflammation of the thyroid gland for any given reason. I mean, it can happen after a woman gives birth. It can happen after different viral illnesses or other types of autoimmune type conditions. So that's the main thing, though, is the TPO antibodies, and then you're also getting different versions of T3 and T4. So just like we had talked about with testosterone, T3 and T4, it needs to be bound to protein, and One of the main proteins is just like SBGH, like y'all had talked about in the testosterone course. You have the thyroid binding globulin, which is like the same version but for the thyroid, and that hormone helps to bind T3 and T4, mainly T4, and it helps to transport it around in the body. So for I've never actually seen it come back. I've had a few that have come back of abnormal, but in order to be thorough, you would want to get what your protein values is in terms of the TBG, the thyroid binding globulin, are as well. So then you also want to differentiate. You have free T3 and free T4, and then total T3 and total T4. And so as part of a full thyroid panel, the free and the total, that's the difference of the protein actually binding it. And so the free is the unbound version of that hormone versus the total, which is all of it, the unbound and the bound version of it. So, that is kind of the whole thing of a thyroid panel is those main labs. And, honestly, most of us as a screening method are getting just that TSH, which is just the very, very top of it. Doesn't really tell the whole story. It's the TSH is coming from the brain, and it's the chemical, the hormone that goes to your thyroid to tell your thyroid to make more of the T3 and T4. So if that is underactive, or let's say overactive in the case of hypothyroidism, that means that your brain is trying to tell your thyroid to squeeze out more and more hormone, but it's just not, because it's, in our case, Hashimoto's, or it's underactive for whatever reason, and it's not able to produce those hormones. So if you have a high TSH value, that's why we diagnose it as, you have an underactive thyroid, because of that TSH value being high, because your thyroid isn't responding.
All right, so are we done with hypo?
Oh, yeah, let's be done with hypo.
All right, we're done with hypo. So let's move on to the opposite end, Austin, hyperthyroidism.
Yep, so...
Which doesn't sound like much of a problem for most people. If someone's listening to this, they're like, oh, that sounds like a good problem to have where they can't gain weight. But
exactly.
It's an issue. It's definitely an issue. So let's discuss it.
Yeah. So, much less common than the underactive thyroid. We have an overactive thyroid. Like you said, everyone always jokes like, oh, I wish I had that problem. But no, you really don't, because, the thyroid gone wrong, which is, where you have way, way too much the thyroid hormones, it can really screw you up. You can have a lot of cardiac issues. Your heart can just be beating 1,000,000 miles an hour. They're usually like little tiny stick skinny, just, like almost like just emaciated. Depending on how severe it is, you can have, in general, you can have a lot of like GI issues and just a whole lot of sweating and flushing and just, everything that is essentially the opposite of an underactive thyroid. So everything is just turned up. So you're just real agitated. Your temperature, you have a lot of temperature sensitivity issues. You can be sweating a whole lot. Your heart rate can be going. You can have a lot of diarrhea and bowel upset. So this is, in general, what we call Graves' disease, which is essentially the reverse process for an autoimmune process that is essentially going against the TSH receptor on the thyroid itself. So this is an autoimmune process, kind of the opposite of Hashimoto's. So these people have the overactive thyroid. And, if you had to pick one, I would definitely pick hypothyroidism, because usually the treatment for people with an overactive thyroid is some pretty gnarly medicines that, kind of essentially destroy your thyroid. And,
wow.
Well, there's a whole lot of different ways to do it. There's two main ones that we use, but then if those don't work, which they don't always work, then you're talking like having to do like radiation type therapy, or even having to take the gland out itself. So it's a little bit more involved. Luckily, it's much less common. But these patients definitely, there's no guessing whenever they come in with Graves' disease, because usually they kind of present pretty classically.
Wow. And so anything else you want to touch on that before I go on, or anything else?
No, not really. it's you really aren't like most people are kind of like, oh, maybe I have hypothyroidism or I don't have hypothyroidism. It's usually not like that for hyperthyroidism. It's usually like, oh my gosh, my eyes are popping out of its sockets. I can't sit still. I'm like almost like a crackhead, and like in the most endearing terms, you're just like super cracked out. So that's kind of the picture of hyperthyroidism. Much less common though than underactive thyroid. So you should know.
Just give them a fidget spinner and have them on their way, man. They'll be fine.
I'll just jack them up in price and buy them off of Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's talk about goiters, because that's another thing that's common too with just thyroid in general. So what is a goiter? If someone does have a goiter, is it something that they should be watching out for as far as for weight loss if they do have one? Let's discuss this now.
So a goiter is essentially just where you have a swelling in the thyroid gland itself. So unfortunately, this is something that is pretty nonspecific. Like you can have it for pretty much anything that we just talked about. So any of the hypothyroidism, you can have a goiter. Any of the hyperthyroidism, you can have a goiter. You can have a whole bunch of nodules on your thyroid, which is just kind of like little tiny growths that can be just overgrowing on the thyroid. If you have after a woman gives birth, thyroiditis, that you can have an enlarged thyroid. Some people just have an enlarged thyroid just because with absolutely no good reason for it, and they're completely fine. So just because you have a slightly larger thyroid than normal, it most often does not mean anything, but you have to kind of get lab values, and you need to have someone who is experienced touching thyroids. You have to get someone who knows what a normal thyroid feels like versus an abnormal thyroid feels like, to feel and say whether or not it's abnormally enlarged or not. So very, very non-specific. Everyone should, you can feel your thyroid gland right underneath your Adam's apple. And in general, you shouldn't really be able to feel it all that much. But, if you start kind of feeling on or looking at, other people's just, around, some people just have just slightly enlarged thyroid gland. And most of the time, it's a pretty normal kind of thing, that really is just kind of, different anatomy.
So I have a question now, because now this is coming to me now that we kind of dismissed that most people don't have hypothyroidism. Always behind. And as far as hyperthyroidism now, if somebody actually has true hyperthyroidism, is there anything they can actually do if, like, let's say their goal is they do want to put weight on and they want to even build some muscle? Obviously, that's going to be tough for them. Is there anything they can actually do, or does the hyperthyroidism have to essentially be fixed in order to be able to do that?
Yeah. I think you could, like we have plenty of people who come in that, my entire career, I've only been at it for, a handful of 4 years or so, but in my entire career, I've had, I want to say maybe 5 to 7 people that I've actually diagnosed with a hyperthyroidism, and probably 5 of them were actually obese, and so it's not like 100%. Like it falls on different levels of the spectrum. So some people can have a very, very mild, like earlier form of hyperthyroidism before it gets super, super bad, versus, the cracked out hyperthyroidism patient is kind of an exaggeration of, when that process goes unchecked for years and years, and those levels are like so high to the point that, their body is just like, essentially, like you said, it's just like so catabolic, and it's like, they probably could eat anything that they want and just, not even be able to hold weight. So it depends on where they are in that spectrum, I would say. So in general, most people probably, let's say like moderate and above should definitely have, treatment for it to get that back into the normal level. But normally we, in order, when we treat hyperthyroidism, we essentially make them, a lot of the drugs that we have to end up using, we make them hypothyroidism, because we destroy a lot of the thyroid gland itself, and then you have to get on levothyroxine afterwards. So It's definitely a process. It's not like a quick thing. And the medicines that we use are, they're not as straightforward as levothyroxine is. We use, a handful of different ones that are a little bit more kind of sensitive as far as how we have to dose them and all that. So, it's I would say in general, if you're having hyperthyroidism, you definitely need labs.
So let's kind of tie this all in now. So what kind of causes all these different thyroid diseases then? How does this all happen?
So for most of them, it kind of comes back to where it falls into the idiopathic realm of medicine, which is we really don't know why. We have a few kind of like good thoughts on it. Like most of them, we think at least genetics has something to do with it. As well as just the environmental factors, where you grew up, different stuff like that seems to play a little bit of a difference into it. But in general, it's kind of a just bad luck kind of thing, which is kind of why a lot of the alternative health circles just run with hypothyroidism because we don't really know why it happens, but it happens, and you have fatigue and all of these symptoms, and then the symptoms are kind of non-specific. So that's where you can read like a million things on the internet about thyroid, and most of them are just kind of like made up by someone wanting to sell their ebook. Trying to get you to, like clickbait, like, oh, thyroid, you eat these 4 foods to, and it's like, in general, it's just kind of bad luck, You can't really say exactly 100% why, but, and for all of the autoimmune type conditions, usually it's for whatever reason your body starts attacking its own tissues. That's the best that we got, to explain why. So, why did I not win the lottery yesterday? It's just, I don't know. It just happens.
Got to be in it to win it, as they say, right? I don't play the lotto. I'd rather just keep the dollar.
Yeah.
I think, isn't the odds to winning the lotto like getting the same as getting struck by lightning twice?
I don't know. I've never played it either.
Yeah. So now, let's just say someone thinks they're having an issue. They go on Google, the Google machine, and they type in and all these symptoms pop up. How do we what are these signs for hypothyroidism and hyperthyroidism? So if you actually do have, the hyperthyroidism, I think you kind of explained that, so we don't have to go over that. But if someone actually does have hypothyroidism, what kind of symptoms should they be feeling? What should they be looking out for? Just curious what the actual things are. It's not what Wikipedia says.
Right. Well, Wikipedia is actually usually pretty accurate. I love it how everyone dogs Wikipedia, but we all look at Wikipedia. But
WebMD.
WebMD is another story. But so I say all this being the guy who has to field everyone who's usually just lazy, and I say that in the most loving way as possible, as you're just not being accountable to. Most people are just not being accountable to themselves. And so that is not to say that people do not develop an underactive thyroid. So I don't at all want to undermine the life-changing and the gravity of a diagnosis like Hashimoto's hypothyroidism, like, oh, it's no big deal. It's just, it's just a frustrating part of my day. But no, it definitely having, if you go through all of the symptoms as far as, I have, fatigue, and I have a lot of cold intolerance and constipation, or menstrual irregularities, unexplained weight gain despite tracking your macros and following New York Muscle Radio's cracking the flexible dieting code to a T, where you're actually putting it in.
Look at this guy, man. You're fired, man.
it just grinds my gears when it's like, yeah, but what is the serving size of it? It's like if you're pounding 3 times the serving size, it's just it's calories. It's not going to go anywhere. But regardless, if you're following that to a T, and you're still having these issues and weight gain and just all of the kind of classic underactive thyroid symptoms, yes, it definitely makes sense to go and get your lab work. And that's where that's definitely where something like levothyroxine, depending on what your levels are, is 100% warranted. I mean, it can help so many people lead a much more productive and, feel, quote, normal again. So, like I said, I don't at all want to make it out to be like, oh, it's a no big deal diagnosis, because it really is. It's a huge diagnosis that can change someone's life, and it is very, very common. It's not to say that nobody has it, but in general, more people need to look within themselves and what they're actually doing and hold themselves accountable before they blame it on something like your thyroid, because the thyroid is the most common scapegoat in medicine. It gets blamed for everything. I mean, I'm guilty of saying, if I don't know why something's happening, it's a Friday afternoon and I'm ready to get out of the clinic, and they say, well, maybe it's my thyroid. Say, yeah, maybe so. Of course it's not your thyroid. It's probably the McDonald's cup you're drinking out of. But it is for sure something that needs to be looked into if you do have those symptoms, which is through all the labs that we talked about, the TSH, the T3, T4 levels. Those are some of the things that, in general, if you ask your doctor to check your thyroid, most of the time we're getting just a TSH, which is the thyroid stimulating hormone. That's like the main one that is essentially just the screening one. And if it is abnormal, technically to make the diagnosis, we need to go and get more labs and see exactly which labs are abnormal. And, that's where we get the T4, the free T4, the total T4, and then the T3. That's the one that we don't really have a great lab for it, but most people, most endocrinologists are getting the total T3 because it's kind of the most accurate one. So that's usually my thyroid panel. When someone has got just textbook, diagnosed Hashimoto's type thyroiditis symptoms, is a TSH, a free T4, a total T4, and then a total T3. And then I'll usually throw in the antibodies, the TPO antibodies, to see whether or not they have an autoimmune process that's ongoing, that's like actually destroying that thyroid gland.
So I'm just going to wrap this up with one more thing. So if someone has hypothyroidism and they do follow what me and Pete say 100%, listen to this podcast, they do everything they're supposed to do, they follow Cracking the Flexible Dieting Code to the T, but they're still having trouble losing weight, is at this point, if they're on medication, the thyroid is not the issue. I just want to summarize that all. So it's
exactly.
So no excuse when it comes to that. It could be something else then.
Yes. Now, everyone is a little bit different. And,
of course.
So many other things go into that. But I would say by far, once those levels are into a normal range, the thyroid is not the thing that's holding you back.
Perfect. One more thing. So how do we keep our thyroid pretty much healthy then? What steps can we do to have a healthy thyroid? I mean, obviously, I'm just going to guess, being lean and working out and exercising obviously has a big, effect with that as well. But anything else?
Really, eating a sensible diet is probably the most important thing. I know we talk a lot about flexible dieting, but you guys are 100% straightforward with it. Is a flexible dieting approach, but still eating clean. I mean, you can't replace broccoli with Pop-Tarts and all of that. So just good balanced diet with plenty of mixed kinds of veggies, I think is probably going to be the best bet, just to keep as much of those normal precursors as far as our thyroid, which is usually iodine. We get that through a lot of seafood as well. So if someone was really concerned, taking not necessarily a fish oil, although that would still help, but eating some sort of shellfish with iodine, or supplementing iodine if for whatever reason you don't get enough iodine in your diet, or just salt your food with iodine-rich salt, which I'm not sure if some of the pink salt and the Himalayan type stuff that seems to be pretty popular. I'm not sure what the iodine content in those is. So you just want to look at the salt shaker and make sure that you get an iodine full version of it.
That's interesting. I actually like the pink Himalayan salt. It tastes good.
Yeah,
I bought it. See, that's why I like. Listen, Pete. I think you might be done, man. Austin may just officially take over this podcast, man. He rants. He makes jokes. Not like you. Look, you haven't said one word this whole podcast.
Yeah, every time I try to talk, you cut me off because it's Anthony Bevilacqua's podcast.
That's right, baby. So I'm glad you understand that.
No, I fell in love with Pete after finding out that he shaves with a straight razor and he listens to what was it? The orchestral music from Mrs. Doubtfire.
Oh, great song.
That's
man.
A man's man after that.
That's right.
Yeah, man, he is. He is.
Everyone loves my quirkiness. I don't know what it is, but that's my my biggest trait, I guess.
I do love your quirkiness, and I did work on the whole manscaping. That is like absolutely. I mean, that is just game changing.
Yeah, well, for my co-host, when you clean everything up down there, it makes it look bigger, right? Right, Pete?
You gotta make everything look good. You gotta enhance everything. That's what this is all about. Bodybuilding and fitness, right? We gotta make our biceps look bigger.
Yeah. You gotta make the weak points look bigger. We got it. We totally understand. Yeah. Austin, listen, thank you so much for coming on, man. We love you. The New York Muscle Radio Doctor is in the house, so we're super happy to have you here, and look forward to having you on the next one when we think of another medical topic that we wanted to discuss. But thank you, and thank you again. I want to say this again publicly for being such a great doctor, because I wish all doctors were like you and actually cared about fitness, because I hate when doctors give advice to people. Oh, just stop exercising, and like things like that. Just that you want to talk about grinds my gears, I'm gonna start ranting. And I just absolutely hate that. So thank you for being a good doctor and going above and beyond what you're supposed to be doing, because I think that in the future, more doctors like you are going to be more seeked out, especially now with the use of social media and things like this. So if anyone's in the Texas area and you have the ability to see Austin, please do so, and just tell him you heard him on this podcast, because it definitely will make a huge difference for you. I guarantee that.
Well, I appreciate it, guys.
Thank you again, man.
All right. Well, it's good talking to y'all.
Pete, your turn, pal.
All right, guys. Pete Anthony with Austin Marshall, New York Muscle Radio.
Doctor.
The official New York Muscle Radio Doctor, Austin Marshall, and we're out.
Enjoyed this episode of New York Muscle Radio? Make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave us a 5-star review, and be sure to follow us on Facebook, New York Muscle Radio.